Hello, team. Welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video of myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. Second time lucky. I recorded this 45 minutes worth of video and my mic had come unplugged. So here we go again. This is a geopolitical news update, but I'm going to focus heavily on one particular area, which is the relationship between the UK and the EU, US involved as well. And we're going to be talking about that in the context of there being an EU-UK summit where we are going to be working, as far as Britain is concerned, working out exactly what relationship we want with the European continent, with the EU, considering that we are no longer in the EU. And actually, we're looking like we're getting a lot of pressure from the US, pushing us further east, trying to do deals with China. Not really ideal for reasons I'll be talking about later, but we're kind of forced to try and mitigate against trade losses from the United States, but also with regard to Europe, like what's going on there, how is Europe reacting to us, considering we're now on the outside, given that Trump has started a trade war with everyone, and that protectionism, the putting up of tariffs and trade barriers, it has a domino effect on the rest of the world, but then they put up trade barriers and bring up these protectionist policies that will affect trade with outside nations such as the UK. So now we're looking around on our own, wondering how we fit into the world, minnow in a shark tank where everyone else is putting up these trade barriers, and we don't have a trade bloc to hang around in, giving ourselves economic security. Okay, so that's going to be the main topic of conversation, because there's a lot going on with regard to that at the moment. Right, before we get to all of that, please remember to like, subscribe, and share. I appreciate all of those who have already done so. Legends one and all. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Right, let's get on with the details now. Okay, so we're going to start actually with Mark Rutte in Kiev at the moment, and we have Zelensky announcing that Russia appears to be operating on a 4-day week, as they said, or at least Trump was claiming there had been this energy truce put in place for a week, and just a couple of days later, they stop and bomb the crap out of Ukraine's energy infrastructure. So quote, either they have 4 days a week or they're betting on war. Zelensky on Russia's broken promises not to strike at energy. At the joint press conference with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, the Ukrainian leader said that Russia had ignored the US's request to refrain from strikes at energy. The promised week-long pause lasted only a few days, after which Russia struck a record blow at the peak of frost. Ukraine will contact the American side regarding this, and that really needs to happen. I don't think Trump is corrected enough by his aides. He needs to be told that Russia have done this, literally told of the news, because I don't think he gets briefings in any detailed manner. So he will need to be told that the Russians did this horrific stuff overnight, and they did it at the time that Trump was lauding this amazing energy truce. Yeah, Trump needs to be embarrassed here. He has no, I think, concept of embarrassment or shame. He has no, I think, ability to feel those emotions, but he should. Like, he should feel embarrassed that he was making these proclamations last night at the very time that Putin was sending missiles into Ukraine to destroy its energy infrastructure. So I guess we'll wait to see if there's any reaction from the United States. Czech Defense Minister Jaromír Zuna has cancelled a US trip by Army Chief Karel Recke after he backed sending 4 L-159 aircraft to Ukraine. Recke said the transfer would not harm Czech defense and contradicted the government's public stance. So this is this tension within the Czech administration whereby there's this coalition of 3 parties who are pretty much anti-Ukraine and pro-Russia, and then there are people, some establishment politicians and people in the MOD who are still kind of pro-Ukraine. And the idea is that the defense minister cancelled this trip by US Army chief. So the Army chief, the guy in the kind of regular army echelons, was all for giving 4 L-159 light aircraft to Ukraine or selling them or whatever. And he's now been punished and not allowed to go to the United States on a visit, on a military visit, because the Czech defense minister from that coalition setup is deeply anti-Ukraine and won't allow anyone to say otherwise from within the government circles, even though this guy is just a military man. Okay, EU's Kai Kallas has said Western pressure on Ukraine risks helping Russia win without fighting. And this is obviously a pointed remark at Trump here. Western pressure on Ukraine. The only ones putting pressure on Ukraine, really, at the moment, appears to be people in the Trump administration. She says the EU must demand Moscow cut its weapons and face accountability for crimes. But yeah, it is the Western pressure on Ukraine that just gives a win to the Russians, essentially, if not checked. Right, Italy has said they are supporting Ukraine joining the EU, but not at the accelerated rate. So we've heard recently 2027 is a date for them. I think that's far too over ambitious. That would probably entail Ukraine leapfrogging over the Balkan states. And here we have the foreign minister for Italy, Antonio Tajani, saying the EU should not accept Ukraine at an accelerated rate ahead of, say, the Balkans. The Balkan states, places like Serbia that want to accede. He stressed Rome's commitments to the Balkan states while pledging continued support for Ukraine's EU party, saying, look, I'm not against the EU, you know, I want the, I'm not against, sorry, Ukraine joining the EU, I want that to happen, but, you know, all things in good time and not at the expense of everyone else's aspirations. I don't know. I think it's unrealistic for Ukraine to join by 2027 unless there's a kind of a two-tier approach to the EU. Right, Liz Truss, typically our former prime minister, who has turned into a batshit crazy, raving lunatic these days. She's like rabidly regurgitating all MAGA talking points. Honestly, what a precipitous fall for this woman who was once a liberal Democrat, then just got into bed with a populist right, and she's been in a tailspin descent ever since. Anyway, she's saying it's excellent that the UN is risking imminent financial collapse. Secretary General has warned. Now, you can have your criticisms against the UN not having teeth, not being anywhere significant with regard to the Ukraine war, so on and so forth. There are many criticisms we can level at the UN, but if you wish it away, like, what will there be? There'll be no structure for international law. There'll be no structure for accountability in any way, shape, or form. And you'll get some kind of replacement that looks like the Board of Peace set up by Chairman Chairman Trump himself. That's what Liz Truss wants. She wants a Trumpian MAGA situation whereby the populist right rule the world by fiat. So have your criticisms of the EU, but a number of you in the threads the other day were extolling the virtues of the UN going. Oh yeah, UN doesn't do anything. It doesn't, it does an awful lot. The UN, it does an awful lot of humanitarian stuff. It really is a huge organization. It does an awful lot, but it's not getting the money because the US is now defaulting on essentially paying their share for the UN, and that's obviously a pretty considerable share. Now they're in arrears, and the UN is looking like it's going to run out of funding in July of this year. So it is looking bad news for international rules and norms. And we will be welcoming in a period of international chaos where the survival of the fittest will be the rule of the land, where the most aggressive and powerful nations will be able to trample over the objectives and intentions and desires of the smaller nations of the world. So Liz Truss essentially is calling for might is right and a new kind of age of empires there, I think, personally. So careful what you wish for. If you wish the UN to collapse, then okay, what are you going to do to replace it? It'll just be something else that looks structurally like the UN. What you need to do is reform the UN from within. It's a bit like, Brexit, I guess. I'd rather reform the EU from within than jump out and go, oh, okay, now we're on our own type thing. So yeah, just be careful about that. And if Liz Truss is asking for it, you would probably be justified in asking for the opposite. Now we're going to get on to the main topic of the video, and this is a super important topic. This is, I'm going to be talking about Brexit to some degree, but we're actually more focusing on the relationship going forward rather than what it was and litigating it. But the preface to this, you've got to understand that if you are a country that moves out of the biggest trade bloc in the world and expects to do really beneficial trade deals with all these other nations from outside of the biggest trade bloc in the world, you are not going to be in a position of power and leverage to get good deals. And so where does that leave you? And we are finding out now, and we're not liking it. So according to the New York Times, European leaders have prepared an action plan in response to Donald Trump. The outlet reports, so before we get to the relationship with the UK, we're going to look at the EU first and Canada in how they've dealt with the United States. I think this is really interesting, and I agree with this. And you've probably heard me talk about this previously, that I have said it's really difficult for someone like Keir Starmer, again, being outside of the EU, to stand up to Donald Trump without the protection of the EU and to be really robust in his rhetoric. So he was, in terms of NATO, when Trump said that stuff on NATO that was highly controversial, because he knew if he didn't, he'd get destroyed in the polls. He'd be destroyed by the electorate. So he is very robust, talking back to Trump in those terms. And Trump understood that and actually kind of back down as much as Trump ever has done there. So that was the right time, and that's justified. And he got I think the optics right there, Starmer. But otherwise, if you're going to stand up to Trump in any other way, which is, a case of standing up for our economic sovereignty or for, for whatever it is against Trump will punish you. He would just punish you. And if you don't have a security blanket, you are going to be feeling that punishment. And I have said multiple times, and I know lots of you disagree with me, but it appears that this is actually the correct way to go. That if you play Trump quietly, but as long as you're getting on with things under the radar, under the bonnet, in the shadows, and doing things to mitigate what Trump is doing out in the open and very publicly, then that's probably the most sensible option. Because if you rile Trump, he will come for you. He is retributive. He will hold a grudge, and he will make you pay. So New York Times is reporting that during an emergency dinner in Brussels, European leaders agreed that amid expected further provocations from Trump, they would remain calm, threaten retaliatory tariffs. So you, through the proper channels, maybe not out in the open and shout about it, but like, if you do this, by the way, US, we will put huge tariffs on tech services, blah, blah, blah. Just know what you're getting into if you're going to go down this path. But we'll say this in a calm and measured manner. And then meanwhile, work, quotes, behind the scenes to ensure greater military and economic independence. Now, if that's happening behind the scenes big time, then that's the best way to deal with Trump. Just say, yeah, whatever, mate. Yep, okay, you stand off over there. Meanwhile, we're going to be talking to Canada and to China and to the UK and to India. And we're going to be doing all these sort of trade deals that will mitigate any issues that arise from Donald Trump going nuts at us. And we'll have our military independence. We're going to get this safe project up and running, where you've got 150 billion euros that nation moving to maybe 800 billion, where European nations can rearm, remilitarize, but also reindustrialize, and so on and so forth. So in the short term, they are considering strengthening Arctic security, while in the long term, they aim to diversify foreign trade, develop their own armed forces, and reduce dependence on US technologies. Now, the problem for the UK is, as I mentioned, we're then outside of this, and we really want to have a piece of, say, the safe mechanism. So this funding that the EU has put together so that European nations can have a much stronger security and defense themselves, but also potentially help Ukraine. UK wants our big military industrial complex to access those tenders, those deals. Now, some people have complained on my threads that, hey, hang on, how's Canada paying so little and they are accessing it, and we've been asked to jump through these hoops, and these hoops are much bigger for us than Canada. That's totally unfair. Canada are paying pittance to access that, and we're being expected to pay billions or whatever. One argument is that actually Canada's military industrial complex is much, much smaller than ours in the UK. They are at least a fifth of what ours are by output. Actually, being closer to Europe geographically, we're much, and having historical ties, we're much more likely in the UK to have huge contracts with Europe, more so than, say, Canada. right? And so therefore our hoops need to be bigger to jump through than the Canadians. That should be proportional. Now the question is whether it is actually still proportional, whether we are having there's an overreaction possibly to the UK, and it could be a kind of way of punishing us, or I don't know, for leaving Brexit or whatever it is. And now, but there are arguments why Canada's hoops are smaller than ours. Okay. But the reality is, we need to access that funding for our own military industrial complex. And we also need to get closer to Europe, because at the moment it's looking pretty precarious indeed, which leads me on to this. And this, as I mentioned, this is the kind of the main part of the video. This is Alex Wickham saying the UK has become seriously concerned that more protectionist policies, and I think this comes from Bloomberg, by the EU could exclude British companies from its supply chains in key sectors, derailing a reset in post-Brexit relations and costing firms billions of pounds. So the situation is this, right? We've come out of the EU. We're having to renegotiate deals with everyone. We were in the biggest trade bloc in the world, and then we had to do deals with Japan. That was crap. Australia, New Zealand. That was crap. It turns out that, you know, for example, if you go and buy a car, if I go and buy a car at the dealership, right? I'm doing a deal with the dealership, right? The metaphor here is, this is a metaphor of a trade deal between two nations. So say the UK and the United States, right? They want to do a trade deal. I want to go and buy a car off the dealership. That's a trade deal. Now, I am not in a position of great power, because I'm just one guy going along to this big dealership, and they're selling to lots of people, and I'm just one of many. But, you know, depending on the economic environment, I might get some more leverage if the car sector is struggling at the moment. They're struggling to sell cars, and then I can go in as a buyer. I have, you know, buyer's power. It's a buyer's market, right? There's a bit of leverage. But essentially what we're doing is, I want to buy a car for as little as possible and get the best deal for my money, and they want to sell a car for as much as possible and get the best deal for their money. Now, if there are lots of other car dealerships I can go to, I've got leverage as well, and that's competition, right? But if it's a sort of a monopoly, where the US is in some sense a monopoly in certain areas of trade, like big tech, right? We're doing a trade deal with big tech and big pharma. There are elements where we are beholden. We have to buy some of this stuff off the United States, and so that's on the table, and we just have to do a trade deal. I can't just say, well, I'm going to not buy my car from this dealership, I'm going to go to that dealership. We have to do trade with the United, or generally speaking, we have to do trade with the United States. We do trade. And so therefore, you know, we need to come to an agreement. Now, in a perfect world, it's an agreement that's mutually beneficial. There's a win-win. It's a positive sum game where both entities walk away from that trade deal looking good, benefiting. But the reality is, we as a much smaller country going to the United States and trying to do a trade deal means that they are going to stomp all over us. And basically they are in the position of leverage. For example, if we went to do a trade deal with the country of, I don't know, Madagascar, like, you would hope that the UK could come out with a better trade deal there, because we're the more powerful nation, right? All things remaining equal. So when we go to the United States, we expect to not be in as good a position from a power play point of view. We are not in a power position against the United States. And that means that any trade deal that they do with us is more likely to benefit the United States disproportionately, and will not benefit the UK as much, right? It's just the nature of doing deals, right? But we opted out of the single biggest trade bloc in the world that was on a par with the United States, 550 million people or whatever it was, compared to what, 350 million in the United States or whatever it is, right? There's a population parity. There's a GDP similarity, much more than, say, the UK. You see this with regard to China. You see all these memes coming out at the moment, which is France's GDP compared to China's, tiny compared to massive. EU's GDP compared to China's, EU's GDP is bigger than China's. So France doesn't go unilaterally to China to do trade deals, although it does do that as well. It will work both in a unilateral fashion, but also as part of the EU. The EU goes and does trade deals really on behalf of its member states with China, and is in a position of much greater leverage. The UK has to go and do these things on its own. Now, the problem is that Trump has started off these trade wars, which are like there's this domino effect. So, and I said this right from the beginning, you'll find that everyone else will start putting up barriers to entry and tariffs because, you know, the EU is going to look at the US going, well, we're going to tariff you and then your steel. And so the EU goes, well, we need to protect our steel now. And so we put on tariffs to protect our own steel. And then everyone else, and before you know it, everyone's put these barriers up. The problem for the UK is we can put our own barriers up. Brilliant. But like, we are just one small element here, and who is going to be desperate to access the UK compared to, say, the whole of the EU? So we don't have the security blanket of the EU where you can buy loads of stuff off each other, tariff free, because you're in a customs union and you're in a single market, so things move around freely as well, and you all happily buy off each other, right? But the UK is looking in on this from the outside, saying, hang on, we want to be a part of that. We want to be a part of the safe mechanism. We want to sell our cheese to you guys. We want to sell our beer to you guys. And Europe goes, yeah, fair enough. But we've got to put barriers up now because the Americans have put barriers up and we want to protect our own. So the EU is going into this protectionist era, as the whole world is, due to the protectionist stance of Donald Trump. We are moving away from free market economics, whether you like it or not. And the UK is now deeply worried. And this goes back to, you know, I've made these arguments before. You will never win the economic argument for Brexit. I just will deny that you can do that. You just can't. And it's, especially, you know, if you remember Jacob Rees-Mogg and these arch Brexiteers, people like Boris Johnson, but Jacob Rees-Mogg literally said Donald Trump will be our best ally post-Brexit. Post-Brexit, Donald Trump went against everyone. He's not our best ally at all. We've done slightly better than the EU, but the EU can depend on each other to mitigate against that, whereas we can't. And we are now victim to the vagaries of international geopolitics in a much greater way. And this is what Alex Wickham and Bloomberg point out. This is absolutely on point. So the UK has become seriously concerned that more protectionist policies pursued by the EU could exclude British companies from its supply chains in key sectors, derailing a reset in post-Brexit relations and costing firms billions of pounds. Keir Starmer's government is lobbying the EU against restricting market access for British businesses under the bloc's Made in Europe initiative, sources tell Bloomberg. The push has become the focus of EU-UK relations behind the scenes in recent weeks and will be raised at high-level meetings in London this week, indeed today, I believe. Britain is urgently trying to dissuade the European Commission and EU member states from pursuing a course it fears could badly hurt both sides, the sources said. It has been a driver of Starmer's recent remarks about taking the UK closer to the EU single market. So he's got a choice. Does he get us closer to the single market, which would be good for the economy, but then you've got free movement of people? And I would argue that the biggest issue for people voting Brexit was free movement of people. That's immigration, essentially. So I would assume that would be the least popular thing to do, would be join the single market where you have free movement of capital, goods, services, labor, and so on and so forth. That free market ideal, right? But the customs union is you are in the same kind of tariff framework. And so the EU starts doing trade deals on your behalf. That's how I would understand it. And if that's the case, that's definitely what we want. My position would be we need to be part of this big group of guys that can negotiate on our behalf and negotiate with much more leverage. So Starmer's recent remarks about taking the UK closer to the EU's single market. The EU has been considering proposals to promote the use of goods and services produced within the bloc in response to Trump's tariffs and wider geopolitical and trade uncertainty. That's been most evident in steel. The Commission's proposals for the Industrial Accelerator Act, delayed until later this month, will set further requirements for goods in sectors including cars and green technology to be EU made. Britain is concerned that if it is excluded, it would badly disrupt UK-EU supply chains. This would be particularly damaging for the car manufacturers that have sites in both Britain and Europe, such as Stellantis, Volkswagen, BMW and Ford. Advanced technology and green energy companies could also be severely impacted, risking aiding competitors. An outcome that weakens UK-EU supply chains would increase costs and uncertainty for businesses on both sides, as well as damaging their national interests. So it would be in their mutual benefit to consider the UK's position as a leading trade partner of the bloc, one source said. So an example of this would be the trade deal done between Mexico, the US, USMCA, right? You got Mexico, the United States and Canada, right? Had a trade deal. Trump comes along, whacks up barriers, tariffs, attacks Canada, and Canada goes, and then looks elsewhere and says, right, let's get together with UK, let's get together with the EU, let's get together with China. And they're forced into mitigating against the losses from their nearest neighbor. They would love to just freely trade with the Americans. That would be of a huge benefit to Canadians, and one would assume to Americans as well. For that free trade, frictionless trade is good for free markets, right? But they're being forced to go further afield. Well, the same with Britain. If the EU puts up these trade barriers, just like the US to Canada, the EU would do that to the UK because they're trying to look after their own, and they're having to do that because the US has done that to theirs. And so if there's knock-on effect, then that leaves the UK going, what do we do? Then you're forced to go to China, but China suck at like support. They're supporting Russia, and on the one hand, we're going with cap in hand to China, and on the other hand, we want to be able to say to them, you can't give stuff to Russia to help in their war against Ukraine. So we want to have leverage over China, but we have no leverage because we're a small country outside the EU. So Keir Starmer goes to China, and everyone's having to go at him saying, why are you going to China? Well, because they're a massive trade partner. They're huge. We can't ignore them. Okay, I understand that. But why aren't you having to go at them about Ukraine? Well, we're saying stuff behind closed doors, but we can't publicly do that because we don't have the leverage, because then they'll just slap us down and then we get no trade deals. And we have no leverage because China are the big guys here, and we've taken ourselves out of the EU. Now the EU can go to China and have more leverage. So the UK being part of the EU allows us more leverage by proxy with China to be able to relent on supporting Russia so much in the war against Ukraine. But when you're going cap in hand to someone, you can't go, please give us your trade, but you can't do this. You have no right to make demands when you're the one that's cap in hand. And the UK is somewhat cap in hand. We do have strengths in terms of some services and whatnot, but and the financial sector. But essentially, we are a much smaller entity than we used to be, and that gives us much less leverage. So an outcome that weakens UK-EU supply chains would increase costs and uncertainty for businesses on both sides, as well as damaging their national interests. So it would be in their mutual benefit to consider the UK's position as a leading trade partner of the bloc, one source said. They warned that penalising British firms with protectionist policies triggered by trade threats from the US and China risked being in breach of the post-Brexit trade and cooperation agreement and the commitments made between the UK and EU at the summit last year. In other words, we have some kind of statutory agreements in place as a result of coming out of Brexit, that if the EU was going to react too officiously to trade barriers being put up by the US and trade barriers being put up by China on the EU, then if they go to town on putting protectionist barriers up against us, we can say, hang on, that's against the agreements that we had in place. But it depends how robust those agreements are. We know from the SAFE debacle that these issues aren't always resolved rationally. So we've been unable to access, or we're able to access the SAFE procurement mechanism, but it's just, as I said, the hoops are pretty big that we have to jump through. The costs are quite prohibitive. The discussions highlight the vulnerabilities faced by the UK since Brexit. Outside of the bloc, Britain has little protection in the event of a global trade war and is reliant on negotiating favourable ongoing trade terms with Brussels, something which may result in further concessions from London. That is a point, and this is why I go back to, you will never win the economic argument over Brexit. We are outside of the bloc. We have little protection. We literally have, what protection do we have as a result? The geopolitical global insecurities and chaos that's going on. What protection do we have as just being the UK on its own? All the EU member states have the protection of each other. Safety in numbers. So this is how penguins work. It's how herds work. It's how schools of fish work, right? Safety, that's an evolutionary behavior that is developed because it's beneficial to exist in packs where you're stronger or safer together. If you're not stronger, then you're safer. We are just on our own as an individual country now. We're no longer in a pack. That makes us all the more vulnerable. And I just don't think you're going to win the argument to suggest that's not the case. We were lied to by people writing stuff on the side of buses and whatnot during the Brexit campaigns. They didn't, most of us could see through it. I mean, I did my research and I was campaigning and debating this in public, right? But ostensibly, most people don't really realize how global economics works. You know, your average everyday Joe out there will be like, yeah, but you know, don't like the Poles coming over here nicking my job type thing. So big problems in UK-EU relations behind the scenes at this week's meetings in London. It also helps explain Starmer's recent language about the single market. The government is very worried about this. On the other hand, there is some leverage that UK has. So what you need to look at are kind of not USPs, but uniqueness, right? What is it that we have that no one else has that we can have leverage over? And really, nuclear is one of these funny things where it's not funny, but as an accident of history, we are a nuclear power. And that means as the US pushes Europe away and Europe says, okay, well, we don't want to rely on you for a nuclear umbrella. You can get rid of your air bases in Europe. You can get rid of NATO or whatever. We're going to do this ourselves. By doing it ourselves, you have to look to France. And France might then say to the UK, well, actually, we can't do this alone. We're a single nuclear power. And actually, it's too much to ask us to provide for the whole of Europe. So we need the UK to help. The problem is the UK is contingent upon the United States for our nuclear deterrence. Our Trident missile is an American missile and maintenance is American, so on and so forth. But if we can move away from that and work really closely with France, then perhaps that's a way into the European customs union or single market or whatever. We can say, hey, look, we'll provide nuclear umbrella for you, but you need to allow us access to X, Y, and Z. So this is a really interesting bit of leverage. Watch out for this one. The Economist reports that Britain and France are deepening their cooperation. Can Europe, they ask, do nuclear deterrence without America? Interesting. But I think Alex Taylor has it right here. So the last 10 years, the messaging out the UK has been, we don't want to be in your EU, your single market or your customs union. And then literally today, a quote, the UK has become seriously concerned EU protectionist policies could exclude UK companies from its supply chains in key sectors. We don't want you. We don't want you. We don't want you. Oh my God, turns out we need you. Turns out we actually need you. Please come back. No, please speak to me. Can we be friends, please? So that's why there are articles like this today. So this is in The Guardian. The EU has an open mind on UK customs union talks, says officials. Valdis Dombrovskis says the bloc is ready to engage amid meetings with ministers, including Rachel Reeves. So the European Commission would be open-minded to discussing closer trade ties with the UK, including customs union, a senior EU official said. The EU Economy Commissioner, Valdis Dombrovskis, told the BBC that the European bloc was, quote, ready to engage with an open mind when asked about a customs union. The comments come amid growing pressure within the Labour Party to enter a customs union with the EU as the government seeks to boost economic growth at a time of geopolitical turmoil. So the customs union, I think, is at the moment the more attractive one that gives us that umbrella of trade negotiations abroad. Keir Starmer is looking for deeper economic links with the EU single market, having told the customs union, quote, doesn't now serve our purpose very well. So I don't know the ins and outs, but it's interesting if Keir Starmer is saying the customs union doesn't serve our purpose, but I think it'd be a harder sell to get into the EU single market with free movement of people. A customs union with the EU would call into question UK trade deals with countries such as India, Australia, and Japan, which add little to economic growth, but are potent symbols of Brexit. I would just ditch those deals. I mean, they were pretty crappy deals by all accounts. You know, India a slightly better one, but the Australian and Japanese deals were, by the admission of the people that did the deals for the Tory government, literally the diplomats that did the deals said they were bad deals, right? So I have no problem getting rid of those. In theory, inside a customs union, the UK would be under the umbrella of EU's 40-plus trade agreements with about 70 countries and regions. Starmer told reporters in recent days that there were, quote, other areas in the single market where we should look to see whether we can't make more progress, so on and so forth. So you watch this space. Like, this is really, really important. Our economy there are some green shoots of success in the UK economy that's been quite surprising. And there are some metrics where we're like, oh, that's okay. We're not as bad as we thought, but it's really precarious. It just takes a little bit of protectionist aggression from the EU and we get screwed. Now, something that's going on in the EU at the moment is war with tech, big tech. I've talked about this an awful lot. France, as I reported earlier today, has raided, or French Paris cybercrime units and prosecutors have raided the French headquarters of Elon Musk's X. I'm wondering what Trump's reaction is going to be, and Musk's. I wonder whether this will open up further trade war between the US and the EU. It's going to be an interesting one to watch. And do you know who could lose out here? Ukraine. As you know, we're trying to get unity with the US over supporting Ukraine, and this kind of thing gets in the way. But this needs to happen as well. I really think big tech needs to be held to account. But at the same time, Spain is to ban social media for under 16s. The prime minister there has vowed to hold social media executives accountable. This is what we want to see. I want to see this, right? This is so important to me. UK privacy watchdog opens an inquiry into X, Elon Musk's X, over Grok AI's sexual deepfake. So there's an attack on X from multiple sides, including the UK and Europe. Europe starting to stand strong against big tech. So this is really, really serious stuff. Now, Elliot Higgins here, referring to Ofcom, the regulator for our communications sector, says it seems a pretty major gap in the DSA, which is the Digital Services Act, is it? What's the government going to do as a next step? Just keep figuring out who is actually responsible for looking into this sort of thing. What's he complaining about? Well, Ofcom say we are not investigating XAI at this time. So XAI is the AI entity, if you like, that's behind Grok. Elon Musk's XAI is something that's now been subsumed by, or he's consolidated it under SpaceX, if I'm correct in saying. It was separate to SpaceX and separate to, I guess, Twitter and X. Now, X has Grok as its social media AI model, and Grok is obviously a XAI. So there's a connection here. But Ofcom has said, we are not investigating XAI, but we are investigating Grok, which is a bit of a funky one. When we opened our investigation into X, we said we are assessing whether we should also investigate XAI as the provider of the standalone Grok service. We continue to demand answers from XAI about risks it poses. We are examining whether to launch an investigation into its compliance with the rules requiring services that publish pornographic material to use highly effective age checks to prevent children from accessing that content. Because of the way the Act, DSA, relates to chatbots, as explained above, we are currently unable to investigate the creation of illegal images by the standalone Grok service in this case. So a lot of confusion over what's going on there. Somebody says, is it worth reading this? I am able to competently speak of the mechanism of control of narrative security platform architecture in this situation and the actors and leverage. There should be a strategic meeting of the minds because at the moment Musk is working through Google and creditors to force Europe to recognize legitimacy of Oracle's governance of Russia. This would functionally silence DSA and European regulatory authorities. I actually don't understand much of that, but you get the point. There's a lot of confusion here over who to follow and what to do. Now, this should be understood in the greater context of techno-fascism. So techno-fascism is something I've talked about, done videos on before. This is Peter Thiel's idea that you don't need democracy, and actually, you know, that tech companies should be dictating policy and governance. And this is also behind, I think, the US's or Trump's desires to take Greenland. It's part of the TechNate, where Greenland would then be something that this organization Praxis, that Peter Thiel and others are involved with. They can set up freedom cities in Greenland, have data centers that can be cooled by the cool area and whatever. Essentially a non-nation state entity of Greenland, which would act as a kind of big technate. But anyway, Peter Thiel is behind it all. So the Nerve, which is this new independent media organization started up by people like John Sweeney and Carol Cadwalladr and others, doing a really good job in reporting on stuff, particularly like this. What's happening in America is techno-fascism. It could happen here in the UK. Peter Thiel's data company is powering ICE operations in the US in part 2 of the Nerve's Palantir series. Carol Cadwalladr argues UK will be next, and we map out Peter Thiel's network, and it is freaking scary. You get all these people, Mark Zuckerberg from Meta, Larry Ellison from Oracle, now owning essentially CBS and trying to take over CNN and Warner Brothers. You got Sam Altman from OpenAI, Elon Musk from X, Donald Trump Jr. with his crypto involved in all these people, JD Vance, who is funded to be senator by Peter Thiel himself, Donald Trump, obviously, Steve Bannon, majorly involved with all these people, and you can see that through the Epstein Files releases. James Orr, who's Reform UK's guy that they've just taken on, Nigel Farage himself, Keir Starmer and Peter Mandelson, more on that in a separate video, but Peter Mandelson in the Epstein Files as a Labour peerage who was the ambassador to the US, who is heavily involved in the Epstein files, not from a kind of sexual point of view. He's gay, so that's not going to be his thing there, but it's going to be more the context, the contacts and influence and all sorts, and connections to Russia as well, from Peter Mandelson, Lewis Mosley, Boris Johnson, Dominic Cummings, who is Boris Johnson's brain. It's all there. Now, loads of interesting infographics and how these people link. Mark Zuckerberg, Thiel was Facebook's first outside investor, giving Zuckerberg $500,000 for 10% of the company in 2004. They've remained close friends and allies since. Alex Karp, who's Palantir's CEO. Thiel and Karp first met at Stanford University and have been friends for 30 years. Karp has been CEO of Palantir since 2004. The US billionaire Larry Ellison, his relationship with Thiel dates back to 2017. Ellison's tech company Oracle announced a strategic AI partnership with Palantir in July 2024 to deliver AI military solutions. Sam Altman, Thiel is a long-standing mentor and supporter of Sam Altman. He is a prominent backer of Y Combinator, Altman's previous outfit, and co-founded OpenAI. The two men are very close friends. Elon Musk and Thiel merged their businesses in 2000 to create PayPal. Thiel was a key early investor in many of Musk's companies, including SpaceX, Tesla, and XI. And so it goes on. Donald Trump Jr., close ally of Thiel. Together, they guide some of the major venture capital funds behind MAGA-aligned projects. Thiel has been called an instrumental force in setting up Trump Jr.'s $2 billion fund, 1789 Capital, which invests in patriotic capitalism. JD Vance, the vice president, Thiel is Vance's mentor. They both met in 2011 when Thiel hired Vance as a partner at Mithril Capital in 2015 and later paved the way for his political career with the biggest political donation ever made in a Senate race. And that's what got Vance to Senator of Ohio. And then he put pressure on the Trump sons to convince Donald Trump that JD Vance should be vice president. And Trump, against who he wanted, made JD Vance his vice president. So this is Peter Thiel's doing. Thiel introduced Trump to Vance. Donald Trump was one of the first Silicon Valley billionaires to back Thiel was one of the first Silicon billionaires to back Trump in 2016 and has since donated millions to the MAGA Republicans. Thiel fed Trump ideas from a Silicon Valley brain trust during his first term. Steve Bannon and Thiel were very close, powerful advisors during Trump's first term. Thiel considered investing in Bannon's new venture after Bannon left the White House, but instead put his money into Rumble, the self-styled freedom-first streaming platform that hosts Bannon's show and is the conservative answer to YouTube. Dominic Cummings and Boris Johnson. Thiel visited Johnson and Cummings at number 10 in 2019. A month later, after Johnson became prime minister. Under Johnson, Palantir was awarded contracts for COVID monitoring, Brexit borders, and MOD and more. And we're going to come onto this in a second because Palantir is all over the British government, and it is super, super worrying. Peter Mandelson and Keir Starmer. On the 2025 US state visit, Starmer went to two places, the White House and Palantir's offices. And this, the one thing that worries me most about the Keir Starmer Labour government at the moment is Palantir and continuing what Palantir were doing previously, and then just not. Well, he's probably really worried about it in reality, but I wonder if there's nothing he can do, or whether you're stuck in this relationship with Palantir, where Palantir are now controlling the UK government to some degree. Starmer was taken to Palantir by Mandelson, and the then US ambassador, whose PR company Global Counsel counts Palantir as a client. Lewis Mosley, UK head of Palantir, former Conservative councillor, ex-research advisor to Rory Stewart, and grandson of Oswald Mosley. Oh, who's Oswald Mosley? The Hitler equivalent in the UK, the former Conservative and Labour politician. He dabbled with everything before becoming a Nazi, essentially. And his grandson, Lewis Mosley, is now head of Palantir. Anyway, Oswald Mosley, founder of the British Union of Fascists. Dr. James Orr, worrying. This is a new guy that's joined Reform recently. So Orr, a Cambridge University philosophy professor, he's actually a Christian sort of nationalist, pro-lifer, is a friend of Peter Thiel and a mentor to JD Vance. Orr invited Thiel to speak at Cambridge in 2024. More on that in a second. Nigel Farage, a Reform UK leader, calls Thiel my friend. Farage appointed Orr as a senior advisor to Reform in October. Reform are under the control, but then you could argue the Labour government is as well, of Peter Thiel and Palantir. Palantir is less a technology company than a political project. That's not speculation. For Thiel, technology is politics. And that's what Cadwallader says. And this particular incredible. So she's written two things here. One is revealed. Palantir deals with UK state total at least £670 million in kind of contracts, including 15 million contract with Nuclear Weapons Agency. Just absolutely scary stuff. So it talks about how they're right in bed with the NHS. Palantir has current and historic deals worth £388 million with the MOD across at least a dozen contracts and extensions to contracts, and more than $244 million pounds with the NHS, 12 contracts and extensions. Government agencies and authorities with smaller contracts include Coventry City Council, Leicestershire Police, DEFRA, so that's the Department of the Environment, Farming and Rural Affairs, I think, and Homes for Ukraine scheme. Wow. And now in bed with the AWE nuclear securities technology. So these are all the areas of Palantir are in bed with the UK government. MOD, 382 million. Highways England, so on motorways and roads, share of £1 billion, but the amount is unknown. One contract for information technology commercial framework. NHS and DHAC, so that's the National Health Service and the Department for Health and Social Care, 244 million plus. Central government and all public sector bodies, a share of 1.2 billion, but unknown. One contract for back office software. It sounds like Musk going into all the departments with Doge and just scraping their data. Local councils, £500 million. London 2012 Olympics, total unknown, contracts unknown. Cabinet Office, 26 million contracts for border flow tools. DEFRA, 1.5 million, one contract for a trade analytics solution. GCHQ, our spies, MI5, MI6. Total unknown, number of contracts unknown, but reportedly includes a data tool called Kite. Home Office, at least 2.2 million, at least two contracts for Project Nectar, an AI platform to unify police data. Oh, they'll be helping themselves to that data. The Department for Levelling Up of Communities, £10 million. And the Government Digital Service, 735,000, one contract for services undisclosed. This is really good work to put this all together, Carol Cadwallader and the nerve here. Just really, really worried about all of this. I'm not going to go into massive detail for this now. Sorry, I wasn't even showing that to you. So I'm going to now show you this. So this is the infographic I was just showing you. This is Peter Thiel's Palantir with Alex Karp at its head, who is just a batshit crazy guy. And they're both very, very dangerous. Alex Karp said he's proud to kill for Palantir type thing in that video excerpt I showed you recently. So these are all the contracts that Palantir has in the UK alone, right? In the UK alone. And they're in bed across the American political system and in bed with all their departments there. So Cadwallader has written this article, What's Happening in America is Techno-Fascism. It could happen here. Peter Thiel's data surveillance company, Palantir, is powering Trump's ICE operation in the US. Carol Cadwallader argues that the UK will be next. And she talks about techno-fascism, which is a technical term, and it does entail essentially finishing democracy. Like, Peter Thiel is not democratic. He does not believe in democracy. He believes in techno-fascism. Super, super worrying. Palantir is right at the heart of everything, and it is at base a political project as opposed to a defense company or whatever. This is the time when Palantir boss Alex Karp said, he was proud to...
Alex, as always, we have a lot of individual investors on the line. Actually. Is there anything you'd like to say before we end the call?
We're doing it. We're doing it. And I'm sure you're enjoying this as much as I am. Let's not talk to analysts about the burden of being right, our burdens of investing in ontology, our burdens of actually looking at the math, the burden of reading what the Rule of 40 is, the burden of being honest about what an enterprise software company is, or the burden of explaining to your friends that you're really happy. Maybe we should just stop talking about it. I'm very happy to have you along for the journey, and you are partners for us. Every Palantirian, we are crushing it. Everyone else who's listening, we are dedicating our company. We have dedicated our company to the service of the West and the United States of America, and we're super proud of the role we play, especially in places we can't talk about. And we love our success in the U.S. and globally. Also, we are doing in the United Kingdom and many other places. Palantir is here to disrupt and make the institutions we partner with the very best in the world. and when it's necessary to scare enemies and on occasion kill them. And we hope you're in favor of that. We hope you're enjoying being a partner, and we're really happy and very, very focused on what we're doing. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. That concludes Q&A for today's call.
That concludes Q&A, where he just said, I'm really happy to be killing people that we disagree with. It's just really weird. Now, I know it's kind of involved in defense and all that, but it's just, that's pretty crazy stuff. But at the heart, these are very pro-American. But then, you know, I'd like to see what he defines as American there and what his core ideals are, because these guys are at the heart of everything in the United Kingdom at the moment, it seems. I mean, they are all over the place. So, you know, this is definitely a worry going forward. Right. Anyway, now back onto what I was talking about, the relationship between all these entities. Trump on Canada. We don't want China to take over Canada. And if they make the deal that he's looking to make, China will take over Canada. And the first thing they're going to do is end ice hockey. And of course, this is nonsense. The reason why Mark Carney's gone towards Canada to start doing deals is because you pushed Canada away. So Canada's naturally going to be looking like the UK has to other places to do deals. China is not going to get rid of ice hockey. What are you banging on about, you absolute numpty? But here we have Mark Carney doing that approach that was advocated earlier in terms of getting quietly with mitigating against the issues that the US causes to Canada, economic issues. So rather than stand up and robustly repudiate Trump in public and berate him and start some kind of war where Trump's just going to escalate that and that's going to hurt you, you just go, yeah, okay, yeah, sure, okay. Fair enough, you get on with that. There's a new world order now. We're just going to go and do some business over here. I'm not going to annoy you. I'm not going to slag you off in public. I'm not going to do you back to you. What I'm going to do is me, and I'm Mark Carney, and I'll quietly go on and improve my business standing with the rest of the world. What does that look like? Well, with Trump wildly firing off tariff threats on Canadian aerospace, Cuban trade, and any other pet peeve, this is a regular reminder, says Jim Stanford, that Trump's policies are a self-inflicted wound on US manufacturing. The US lost 72,000 manufacturing jobs since he started the tariff wars, and Canada gained 16,000. So Canada's gone away, quietly got on with its work of improving its business situation and mitigated against the disaster that could have happened if they had just tried to make things better with the United States. And it would have been on a hiding to nothing. Don't try and appease Trump, but don't also try and annoy him. You've just got to be careful with how you deal with him, but make sure you're under the bonnet, getting on and making your engine, work a lot better. And meanwhile, of course, the United States is not doing that. So, and this is fascinating. The recession indicator nobody's watching has just collapsed 32%. So heavy truck sales. Watch out for this. When companies stop buying $150,000 trucks, you know something, or they know something that you don't actually. So you're buying big trucks, it means things are going well. You're not buying big trucks, it means things are going badly. Here's the rule. Truck sales rising, business is expanding, economy is strong. People are buying things all over the place. You're buying this, buying that. It means that you have to get more stuff in. You need to, supply needs to meet demand. So you're building more things. You're moving them around the roads. You need trucks to move. Logistics. As soon as the economy looks in trouble, of course, logistics gets hit, freight gets hit, trucks get hit. So truck sales are rising. It means business is expanding. The economy is strong. Truck sales are flat for 3+ months. It's a warning. Growth is slowing, which is what's been happening. And now truck sales crashing over 20%, you're in a recession. The recession is already here. Well, heavy truck sales have just dropped 32% year over year, and that's the steepest decline since the Great Depression of 2009. 2008, truck sales crashed 40%, Great Recession. 2020, COVID recession, truck sales crashed 35%. 2024, truck sales are down 32%. What does that mean? It means that the US is likely in some kind of recessionary period at the moment. Falling US truck sales point to a spike in the unemployment rate, is the claim here. And unemployment seems to correlate with, truck sales issues. Trucking companies aren't buying because freight demand is dying. Freight demand is dead because consumers stop spending. Consumers stop spending because they're broke. That isn't a leading indicator. It's a confirmation. The recession isn't coming. It's already here. Watch truck sales. Ignore the GDP growth numbers. It talks about jobless boom. This idea that you look at GDP, yeah, we're producing loads of stuff. Okay, services, IT, tech, AI. Yeah, but what about people making things? What about jobs? What about wages? What about bonuses? No, that's not looking good. Okay, so actually you've got a recession in some area, even though the stock market looks pretty healthy. That's arguably what's going on. And now, that's just to talk about what Canada is doing against, say, the United States, where Canada is trying to mitigate against that, go and do deals with the EU, UK, China, whatever. At the same time, US is burning its economic bridges, it's burning its political bridges. So you had Trump coming out against NATO, as we heard, and then you've got loads of protests in with veterans, their families and supporters are standing together in Copenhagen protesting Trump's deeply disrespectful statements and his mockery of the sacrifices made by Danish men and women who fought in US wars when NATO Article 5 was invoked. So you've had a lot of pushback in Denmark. In fact, there's been a large drop in Danish desire to travel to the USA. I never thought it would be like this. We sell a little to Hawaii, but the mainland is struggling. We are down 50% of the sales we usually have in January, maybe 40%, says a local Danish travel company that, on the other hand, sells more trips to Canada. Now, the US was in trouble with tourism dollars last year. It looks like it's going to be a big problem this year. I saw for the first time ever in my life Universal Studios advert on TV. And I'm like, UK never has Universal Studios adverts because it's just a given. You're going to go to Florida, you're going to go to Universal Studios and Disneyland. They don't need to advertise. If they're advertising now, that shows a problem. Now, we do have Disney adverts in the UK, but I've never seen one where they're trying to give away cheap holidays. And I saw cheap Disney holidays from Disney, which means that Universal Studios and Disney, and then I read something on this yesterday, concluding exactly this, that they are struggling to get bums on seats. They're not getting the holiday makers because the US has burnt bridges, ICE, border control, airports, just the PR in general, the optics. People are choosing to go elsewhere, go to Euro Disney instead of Disneyland in Florida. And this is being borne out by stats within Denmark, but I'm sure, although Denmark will be worse maybe than other places, since the relationship with Denmark has been very, very strained, that's going to be reflected, no doubt, in other places as well. But, you know, optics have just been really poor. So currently in Copenhagen, in front of the US Embassy, says Dean Blundell, he is there actually, tens of thousands standing in solidarity with Danish vets. Trump's coward ambassador is hiding inside. What he's talking about is there were 44 Danes who died as a result of NATO Article 5 being invoked in Afghanistan. They went and helped the American troops. Then Trump slagged off NATO troops and said they were hanging around in the back. Actually, Denmark lost more per capita than any other allied nation, I believe. And what the Danes then did is put 44, because I think 44 people died, they put 44 Danish flags outside the US Embassy. And the US Embassy, you would have thought, would be pretty aware of the optics, and you'd think they'd be very careful about how they dealt with this. They went out and took down the flags. They took away the flags. And that then caused even further issues with the Danes. You're just thinking, come on, guys, like, really? Read the room, mate. So yeah, anyway, the relationship between currently Denmark and the United States is presently not very good. Now, I'm going to sort of leave you with this. I found this absolutely fascinating. It kind of circles back to what we were talking about at the beginning. Is the UK at home in the EU? Is the relationship with the EU something that they want? You know, do they want us? We probably want to be there or thereabouts, economically speaking, at least to some degree. Although people, I'm sure, will disagree with my conclusion there. But I don't know how you can. I think, you know, if we want to prosper economically, we need to be selling to our closest neighbours, literally geographically. We're not going to sell huge amounts of cheese to bloody Japan and Australia, the other side of the world. Those are perishable goods. You know, it's more likely that we're going to sell a lot of that stuff to France and Germany and so on and so forth. But this was produced or at least released by the German, just trying to remember who it was now. The German government posted this on TikTok, right? And I find this is a good bit of PR, this, and I like it. It's positive, and you feel good afterwards. But Keir Starmer features on the backpack of this penguin. Remember the meme of Donald Trump holding a penguin's hand as they walk with an American flag into Greenland. And everyone's like, hey, you don't get penguins in Greenland. They're South Pole, not North Pole. You know, sort it out, mate. But anyway, I think on the back of that, there's this kind of penguin actually going out on its own, and the penguin is actually European, but it includes Keir Starmer. So that's interesting.
He would immediately head right back for the mountains.
So look at the backpack there. That's Keir Starmer's head on. It's got Emmanuel Macron at the bottom, Friedrich Merz at the top there, and Keir Starmer. And yet this is an EU video. You'll see all the yellow stars and the EU flag. It's a real EU video here, a real pro-EU positioning. And yet Keir Starmer's there.
But why?
Yellow stars.
We do prefer respect to bullies. We do prefer science to plotism. And we do prefer rule of law to brutality. It's a good place. And my guess is that it is largely underpriced by the market.
European friend.
Loyal,
For sure. Competitiveness.
for sure.
Defense of freedom.
For sure.
Security.
For sure. A rule of law. For sure.
Justice. Peace. Respect.
For sure.
Europe must stand together.
For sure.
I love it. So European. And yet, you know, Macron is shades, and the repetition is always good. For sure. Security, yes. And it's great. I love all of that. And I think it's nice to see that kind of pushback. And yeah, we need to stick together as a sense of unity, but including, it has to be on purpose that Keir Starmer is included there. I find that absolutely fascinating. You know, as this very pro-Labour source says, good to see Starmer so visible in this. That was a conscious decision. It did not have to be, I love Europe, they're so cool, and they really like our PM, is her claim. I mean, well, yeah, whatever. But there's some very interesting positioning there. You know, yeah, there's this pushback against the United States from inside Europe, and it's looking, you know, this isn't going to be shoved down Trump's throat here, but this is very much a, hey, let's be happy with each other and let's depend on each other for security, for, you know, competitiveness, for so on and so forth, the rule of law. You know, there's a very pointed position where we believe in a rule of law for sure, even if others don't. And what others believe in is a big triumphal arc. So this is Donald Trump's new vision of the arc in Washington. Chris Owicki said, I hadn't realized there was a design for the gargantuan planned arc to Trump in Washington, D.C. It's so gaudy and much bigger than any other triumphal arc in the world. In fact, second only to Hitler's planned Berlin Arch. It was never built. So it will certainly stick out like a sore thumb. There you go. So yeah, that's that. But I think some really interesting discussions are going to be taking place over the coming weeks, days really, today, concerning the relationship of the UK to the EU, and you know what we're going to be doing going forward. What's it going to look like? And at the same time, how are we going to battle against big tech when we're on our own? We need to be within like the safety and security of Europe to be able to stand up strong to these big tech influences. But is that even possible when big tech is already proliferating right throughout our state? When Peter Thiel's Palantir seems to be at all places, at all times. Deeply, deeply concerning. Anyway, that's enough from me. Thank you for watching. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.